Like, what kind of sparked your love for it? Because you spent so much time.
Literally as a 10, 11-year-old kid, just flipping the channels and one day seeing it and going, wow, this is awesome. Like, I love this, and just fell in love with the like wrestling itself. And I was just nothing but a fanboy. And I remember telling my sister when I was 12, I was like, one day I'm going to do that. And she giggled and said, yeah, no, you're right. And then lo and behold, there I stumbled into the business. I tell the story. I was working as an accountant in New York, and I would come home on weekends and roll around my friend's backyard wrestling, and I'm doing the air quotes here, backyard wrestling, and we would rent a ring from Larry Sharp at the Monster Factory.
Oh, wow.
And we would put on our own little pay-per-views once a month. We had our, cardboard cutout belts, and we had our own, every person was like 5 different characters, and we put on a pay-per-view. So one day Larry Sharp stood by and watched us, and at the end he's like, hey, you're pretty big, pretty athletic. You ever think about doing this for real? And I was like, me? Yeah, okay. And he goes, I'll put you on my next show. Sell 50 tickets, you can be on my next show. So I sold 4, bought the other 46 myself, and that's how I was on my first show.
I love it. That's so like old school. That's kind of like what I was still experiencing when I first started coming in, is that whole paying your dues and someone trying to give you a chance. Like, all right, kid, here's your shot. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, here's your shot. You got one chance, kid. Get it out of the park or strike out, but we're going to figure it out.
That is awesome. I love. Do you remember exactly who you saw when you were flipping through the channels?
I want to say, like, I remember Dusty Rhodes being one of my first images of wrestling.
Nice.
Yeah, because the NWA, I grew up in the Northeast, so, WWF was popular, but the NWA was on, like, and you're too young to remember this, but back in the day when we had to turn the TV channel with our hands on the dial, it was on channel 17 out of Philadelphia, and that was the NWA. And I remember, I think it was like Dusty Rhodes or something like that, or it could have been the Rock and Roll Express. But either one, I was just mesmerized by what I was seeing.
That is so awesome. I missed all of that. When I first finally got to see wrestling, it was already like the Monday Night Wars were happening, so like I wasn't even allowed to watch it. So once I started getting into wrestling and actually pursuing it and doing it, I had to go back and watch all the territories and everything like that. And then I was just like, oh, wow, mind blown. Yeah. This is magical. Like, what am I watching now? Like this stuff is amazing.
Yeah, like the territory days, between like the old UWF, Bill Watts' territory, or NWA, or World Class out in Texas, or the AWA. My goodness, man, some great wrestling. You got to see guys who would later go on to the WWF and become huge stars, but you got to see them, like a Kurt Hennig. You realize how good he was, but you didn't know why he was good. He's just really good. And, you got to see, a young, Hulk Hogan or people like that. And it was kind of cool seeing them there. And it's like watching like minor league baseball. You get to see these guys grow up and all of a sudden now they play for the Phillies or for the Yankees. It's like, I remember when.
I remember back in my day.
Back in my day.
I love it. Oh, when I started like rewatching stuff, and I kind of feel like what's old was like new again, so it was exciting to watch. And he never missed. I never saw him miss the gum. Kurt Hennig never missed. Never. No. Loved it. He would just go.
I remember one thing he used to do the same thing with the towel. He would throw it over his shoulder. I remember one time he threw it over his shoulder and it landed like on Mr. Hughes' shoulder, like perfectly landed on his shoulder. I was like, there's nothing this guy can't do.
No. I love it. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I'm very familiar with the East Coast. And do you remember like Lincoln Park, when all the wrestlers would come to Lincoln Park? Do you remember that?
Yes.
My mom actually was like 4 years old, And she remembers meeting Andre the Giant in Lincoln Park when like
Really?
Chief Jay Strongbow would come, Killer Kowalski, Andre the Giant, so many guys, right? And he scared the living daylights out of her because he just sees this young little girl and he goes, "Hi," and he puts his hand on her and it like covers her whole entire head like this. To this day, she never forgot that. That's the stuff, man.
I remember meeting as a kid. I remember meeting Gorilla Monsoon at a car wash, and he wasn't as big as Andre, but I remember my brother and I both put our feet in his shoe.
In the same shoe.
In the same shoe. And it's like, wow, he's huge.
That is so cool.
Now,
and then fast forward and you can.
I always ask this question: what made you fall in love with wrestling?
Oh man, it before I even truly understood what the business was, there were so many aspects of everything that I ever wanted to do with my life, and it was in wrestling. I always knew that I wanted to be an actress like Bette Davis. Always knew. I fell in love with her, and I fell in love with old Hollywood films when I was a young kid. I grew up watching like H.R. Puffin stuff with Mama Cass Elliot and Billy Hayes and Jack Wilde. Like that was the kind of like childhood I had, even though it was like outdated when I came along. And I always knew I wanted to travel, and I loved to read. I always loved like Stephen King and all these different books when I was a kid. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I loved public speaking. I taught it in college and stuff. And then I always was into sports. I was a tomboy. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup, so I played sports and martial arts and all that. And I was like, that's pro wrestling. And I remember, like you, I was flipping through the channels one day. It was my first real memory because I had to sneak little bits and pieces, because I wasn't allowed to watch it. And I remember one day it was Christmas Eve, and I'm flipping through the channels. I'm in my 70s bunk beds, and I'm supposed to be asleep. Santa's coming. And all of a sudden, I stop on this channel, and I hear a din-din. Dun, 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 dun. And then there's this big giant Titantron, and there's this countdown going, and The Rock is in the ring, PO'd to the max, and all of a sudden it's like the debut of Chris Jericho. And I remember him saying, "I'm here to save the WWF." And then I remember The Rock shaking his head like this in the microphone like he did. And he's like, "Who said the WWF needs saving?" And the entire arena just exploded with emotion, and I was just like, this is my life now. I'm all about this. This is what I'm going to do. And like you, I was like, okay, Taylor, yep, it's a phase. She'll grow out of it. Yeah, no.
No. I'm still in this wonderful world now.
Yes, completely.